Rhianna and Luciella are finally becoming playable in epicseven, and this is definitely one of the most long-awaited and interesting releases that we've had in a while. For years, people knew about RNL as one of the most iconic thief artifacts in the game, maybe even mistaken as characters at time, but it was the artifact that could randomly give an extra turn and completely change the outcome of fight completely out of nowhere. But now they're no longer just an artifact, they're now being turned into an actual 5-star thief hero duo. And the craziest part is that they have 132 base speed, which means they're the fastest character in the game, even faster than characters like Rhianna or Ran. Now, before we even get into the rest of the kit though, this tells us a lot about what Smilegate wants them to do. They're meant to move first, immediately pressure the enemy team, and start chaining actions before the opponent can properly respond. RNL are also epicseven's first real twin-style hero character, and they swap between each other during combat, with Rhianna acting more as the debuffer and Luciella more like acting more as the DPS in this case. So today we'll be going over their skills, likely how you'll want to build them, what kinds of teams that they fit into, where they'll be used, and whether they actually look worth pulling for. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed or learned something from today's video, and let's start with the kit. So to start things off, there is a lot to break down here in terms of what to offer from RNL's kit. As you can see stat-wise, yes, they do have a decent amount of attack, decent HP and defense, but more importantly, of course, the increased speed here alongside 35 crit rate. This is pretty crazy. But in terms of the actual main gimmick of the character, here's where we actually need to talk about S2, which is their Hunter's Mark ability. Now, the S2 is where the switching gameplay really starts. Rhianna's S2 strips 2 buffs from the enemy, inflicts bind and defense break for 2 turns, then it swaps to Luciella and grants an extra turn. After attacking, if the target has a debuff, Luciella will activate Waning Moonslash as an extra attack. This, of course, means that Rhianna's side is very clearly built to open the fight, as she'll strip, apply the debuffs, obviously enable defense break, and then swap into Luciella to continue dealing damage. Now, Luciella's S2 works quite differently. She gives herself an attack increase for 3 turns, attacks the enemy, swaps back to Rhianna, and then grants herself an extra turn. I know, there's a lot of swapping here. After attacking though, if the target is at 50% health, or oops, not too far yet, if the target is at 50% HP or lower, this is where Rhianna will activate Half Moon Slash as an extra attack. And so while Rhianna of course starts, Luciella is the side that takes advantage of it. Now, this is pretty cool, but now we actually have to move to the skill 3, which is pretty crazy, and this is known as Blade of Pursuit. This is where both twins attack together, and Luciella attacks all enemies, and if the target is a hero, this attack will ignore damage sharing, which is pretty important this day and age. That part is, of course, very important though, because damage sharing is one of the most annoying defensive mechanics right now in PvP, and then Rhianna, of course, will dispel 2 debuffs from all allies, or rather from all enemies, and inflicts fear from 1 turn, which is something that you've probably seen from characters like Sigrid, characters like Diane, and is extremely, or not Diane, from characters like Sigrid and characters that of course debuff you or are much faster and are able to debilitate your team, which then allow the rest of your team to go, which is quite annoying, but then they gain a barrier proportional to their attack for 3 turns. Their special effect, Butterflies After a Dream, is active from the start of battle and remains throughout the fight, and this gives them 70% evasion. On top of this though, at the start of a fight, Rhianna gains effectiveness based on speed, while Luciella gains crit damage based on her speed too. This again is a whole ton of free stats, the evasion, the crit damage, and the effectiveness, which is really, really impactful. But actually, this isn't where the rest of her kit actually ends, as Half Moon Slash is something that's quite impactful, which also has a pretty cool debuff. Now, with her skill 1, this attacks and inflicts erosion for 2 turns, and if it crits, it detonates erosion effects on the target. Now, erosion deals damage based on the target's lost HP at the start of their turn, and the effect is doubled against heroes. Waning Moonslash, of course, just by itself, also just gives Luciella an attack increase for 1 turn. This will attack and absorb part of the damage dealt as health, which again is pretty nice for the sustain, despite her already having 70% evasion, but we'll have to see whether or not this is super impactful, as again, I would imagine being 132 base speed kind of ends things quite quickly, assuming of course you're able to guarantee the turn. I mean, just look at this damage, it's pretty impactful. Okay, now Of course, we do also have to address the fact that, yes, this is a debuffing, evasive, damage, and sustain character, which is pretty crazy, but we should actually talk about the builds or what to expect when it comes to Rhianna and Luciella. Now, of course, the stat that you obviously are going to fixate on is speed here. As you can see in terms of their base stats, this is, again, a 132 base speed character, so very likely you are going to be using this character on something like speed set. However, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is an impossible character to find on other sets, but as for the two-piece offset that you would want on Rhianna and Luciella, you'll likely just be using whatever gives you the most speed. As I'm sure most are familiar, speed is not necessarily something where you can be picky, and otherwise, if you are running a missing two-piece set, or if you're just using your fastest pieces, that's likely most ideal. However, I can imagine maybe wanting a bit of bulkiness or a bit of tankiness with something like HP set, sometimes running immunity set if you want to avoid certain debuff stacking, otherwise running something like crit set, torrent set, anything in between, maybe even pen set. Now, again, this doesn't really end up mattering too much if it's hit, crit, health, etc. If the pieces, again, are fast, they're probably worth using. Now, again, the one important thing, though, is that you do likely want to hit 100% crit rate, because a lot of their offensive value depends on landing crits with erosion detonation and Luciella's damage. But for main stats, this means you're likely looking at, of course, speed boots, crit damage or crit rate neck, an attack or effectiveness ring depending on your build. Now, the nice thing, of course, is that their kit already kind of gives you a lot of this free stat, as again, Rhianna gains effectiveness and Luciella gains crit damage. So again, the faster that you make them, the more value that both sides of the units get. As for substats, it'll be pretty obvious from this, from what you could tell, but you'll likely want a bit of crit rate until 100%, though as a character that has 35% base, if you are using something like a crit rate neck, that does limit you a little bit, but otherwise, of course, you want crit rate until you reach 100%, attack and crit damage, and otherwise effectiveness if you want more debuff consistency. For artifacts, their main artifact, as far as I can tell, is likely going to be something like Glorious Flag. This fits the idea of them being harder to deal with while they already have evasion and a very aggressive kit. Otherwise, you could also have things like Violet Talisman or Shadow Wind 7, depending on how people end up using them and what matchups you're trying to cover, but for now, the safest build is pretty simple. Be as fast as possible, get 100 crit rate, then balance damage and effectiveness depending on your gear. However, as a side note, it's also possible, again, that people are going to use her with something like HP neck, as people have done with characters like Rhianna in the past. But once the build is clear, the next question, of course, is where they actually fit. Now, RNL is likely going to fit in basically any PvP team. Usually when we talk about a new unit, we try to separate them into cleave, aggro, standard, or turn 2. But in this case, their kit does so much that I'm sure both turn 2 and turn 2 players and cleave players are basically going to want to first pick these characters. Again, they have some of the fastest speed in the game, which means they naturally contest turn order. And with this, again, they not only have this insane speed, they have strip, defense break, bind, fear, damage sharing, ignore, follow-up attack, extra turns, 70% evasion from the start of battle. There's just too many useful tools here for so many situations, and at least from right now, it doesn't feel like they have a clear draft weakness from kit alone, aside from, of course, potentially in certain cases, just obviously being outsped by something like Zio or Harsetti. Now, again, for turn 2 and standard teams, I could easily see people taking teams like Rhianna and Luciella alongside Salome, Perfumer Biblis, Estelle, and then ML Yulhar or Ruel, and with this, Rhianna and Luciella are likely to start the team, threaten debuffs, force awkward responses from the enemy, and still be pretty hard to kill because of their evasion. For Cleave, I would imagine things are likely going to look sort of similar to what you would imagine from most cleavers in the game as of now, which again is most likely something like a Rhianna and Luciella first pick into Salome or something like Scales perhaps, then add with characters like Briarwitch Iseria and a flexible 4th and 5th pick. In these drafts, though, RNL can set up as both the opener and the more DPS or, kind of the enabler for the rest of the team. As, again, they can strip. I'm not going to list all the things that they could do again, but you get the picture. The main reason, though, again, is that that you may be able to pick these characters on 1-2, even as a cleaver, which is kind of rare for new and recent releases, is because, of course, they're so flexible. They're not just an opener. They're a DPS and they can also be a debuffer, which is why, at least for right now, the pressure that they add to the team, or the pressure that they add to the enemy, is quite impactful. But now that we've actually covered teams, let's talk about where they'll obviously be used, which is RTA. Now, again, I've already kind of briefly touched on this, but in terms of where you'll probably find them, not just what the teams that you'll be using them on or you'll be using them in, it's pretty likely that you'll find this character in not just RTA, but also Guild War and Arena. Now, of course, with Arena and Guild War, they'll probably have to be on different or more cheesier builds, and I'd expect either very, very fast anti-Zeo or anti-Harsetti sort of tech built into their sort of builds, or with their builds if they're going to be used in these locations, as otherwise, yes, obviously Rhianna and Luciella are not countered by being or not avoidant of things like Zeo and Harsetti with their turn manipulation type shenanigans. But again, their ignore sharing gives them a very direct answer to a lot of defensive setups right now, which again makes them pretty good into basically any sort of bulky team at the moment. Though again, this is kind of dependent on, of course, like these sort of teams or the sort of players that you're going to be encountering. Now, I do also want to say that, again, the extra turns and the fear alongside the evasion just by themselves are maybe some of the most annoying things that you have from a character at the moment. But even for right now, I'm not entirely sure, or I'm not super committal right now to say whether or not they could be used in something like PvE, though I'd be cautious, as again, their kit looks extremely PvP focused. Now, so overall though, guys, RNL looks like one of the most unique releases that epicseven has had in a long time. They're not just the most iconic artifacts in the game anymore, they're now a playable 5-star thief hero. Of course, the main selling point here is the 132 base speed, making them the fastest unit in the game. But the kit that they have too is also pretty insane. It's constant switching, extra turns. Again, you're probably going to see some players that have 350 speed Rhianna and Luciellas. And again, all this looks super crazy. If you're an RTA player, this looks like a massive release and someone you'll want to pick up. For Cleave players, they look absolutely insane. For Turn 2 and Standard players, they also look like a very strong first pick, kind of like what people used to do with Renac, just to kind of avoid or prevent Cleave players from playing them. And otherwise, for PvE-focused players, this is likely not going to be a character that you care for, unless if you are a collector, in which case, pull to your heart's content. In any case, thanks again for watching, guys. This was my first impressions of RNL, though honestly, from what we've seen, it looks like they're going to be pretty insane. Let's be honest. Thanks again for watching, though. I'll see you all next time. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.